The frost-covered thermometer outside the sunroom window read 14 degrees as I pulled my third blanket tighter around my shoulders. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air of what my daughter and son-in-law now called my cozy, private suite. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. In reality, it was nothing more than our old 3-season sunroom with a hastily installed space heater that did little against the bitter Michigan winter. The walls were too thin, the windows too drafty, and the small bathroom they'd added lacked hot water half the time. But according to Olivia and Curtis, it was the perfect arrangement for someone my age. I am Margaret Parker, 72 years old, and 3 months ago, I signed over the deed to my family home to my only daughter because she convinced me I was becoming too confused to handle my own affairs. Now I was sleeping in a glorified porch while they hosted dinner parties in the house that Harold and I had paid off 20 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me as I listened to the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drift from the dining room. The words cognitive decline and early dementia that Olivia had thrown around so convincingly when convincing me to sign the papers seemed to have been forgotten now that the deed bore her name instead of mine. "You're welcome to join us, Mom," Olivia had said earlier, her voice carrying that syrupy tone she used when she wanted to appear considerate in front of others. Although Curtis mentioned his clients might find it a bit awkward, what she meant was that I might embarrass them. Curtis Daniels, my son-in-law of 7 years, was busy trying to expand his real estate development business, and apparently a mother-in-law who occasionally misplaced her reading glasses or forgot. To water the plants was a liability to his professional image. What Curtis didn't know, what neither of them knew, was who I really was before I became just Olivia's mother in their eyes. They had no idea who I was about to call. The sound of my arthritic fingers tapping on my ancient flip phone was drowned out by the boisterous conversation in the main house. Harold and I had built our Tudor-style home on Maple Street back in 1976, when Lakeside was still a quiet town where everyone knew their neighbors. Harold had been the vice president of First Lakeside Bank for 30 years. His financial acumen had been legendary in our community, while I had taught mathematics at the local high school until my retirement 15 years ago. Together, we had created a comfortable life, set aside a sizable nest egg, and raised Olivia in a home filled with love and stability. When Harold passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I had mourned deeply but continued to manage our affairs with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized our 43 years of marriage. I never expected to end up here, relegated to an unheated sunroom by my own daughter. But looking back, I could trace the path that had led to this moment, each small step that had seemed reasonable at the time. It began with small comments after Harold's death. "Mom, did you remember to pay the property taxes?" Or, "Mom, are you sure you should be driving at night?" Concerned questions that gradually evolved into statements. "Mom, I noticed your bills were sitting unopened." Or, "Mom, you've been wearing the same sweater for 3 days." The incidents they pointed to as evidence of my decline were ordinary senior moments, forgetting where I'd placed my keys or calling Olivia by our cat's name once during a phone call. But with Curtis whispering in her ear and their frequent references to friends whose parents had deteriorated rapidly, the narrative of my incompetence grew. The final straw came when I accidentally left a pot of soup on the stove and set off the smoke alarm. No actual fire, no damage beyond a scorched pot, but it became the dramatic evidence they needed. 2 days later, they arrived with pamphlets for assisted living facilities and a deed transfer for my house. "It's for your own safety, Mom," Olivia had insisted, her hand resting on mine in a gesture that felt more restraining than comforting. "We can't bear the thought of something happening to you while you're alone in this big house." "The housing market is hot right now," Curtis had added, not quite meeting my eyes. "If we put your name on our mortgage and use this house as additional collateral, We can finally build that dream home in Lakeside Estates. You'd have your own suite there too, something modern and easy to manage." I had hesitated, still capable of recognizing the red flags despite their insistence on my cognitive failings. "I'm not sure, Olivia. This house has been in our family for decades. Your father—" "Dad would want you to be safe," she interrupted. "He would understand that things change as we age. Remember how he always planned ahead?" The invocation of Harold's practical nature was a calculated move. My late husband had indeed been a planner, but what Olivia didn't understand was exactly what he had planned for. I signed the papers, not out of confusion as they believed, but because I wanted to see exactly how far they would go. Sometimes, to understand a person's true character, you need to give them the opportunity to reveal it. Within a week, my bedroom furniture had been moved to the sunroom. My personal items, photo albums, Harold's collection of nautical books, my cherished pottery, were boxed and stored in the basement. "To give you less to worry about keeping tidy," Olivia explained. The renovations began almost immediately. The warm, traditional interiors that Harold and I had carefully curated were stripped away in favor of the sleek, modern aesthetic that Curtis preferred. The hand-carved banister that Harold's father had installed was replaced with glass and steel. The vintage wallpaper in the dining room was covered with minimalist gray paint. I said nothing, watching as they erased 40 years of memories under the guise of updating and improving. I ate dinner alone in my sunroom most nights, served on plastic plates because, according to Curtis, at your age, dropping things happens. I was invited to join them only when it served their narrative of the devoted daughter caring for her aging mother. The checks I wrote for household expenses were carefully monitored. "Just to make sure you're not getting confused with the decimal points, Mom," Olivia would say. Meanwhile, my Social Security deposits were being directly transferred to an account they had set up to simplify things for me. When I asked about accessing my other accounts, the investments and savings that Harold and I had built over decades, Curtis had patted my hand condescendingly. "Don't worry about all that complicated financial stuff, Margaret. We've got it covered. You just focus on your puzzles and TV shows." That evening, as the dinner party continued without me, I made my decision. The flip phone in my hand, the simplified device they had insisted was more appropriate for someone my age than my previous smartphone, had only a few numbers programmed into it. I scrolled to the one labeled Walter and pressed call. Walter Freeman had been Harold's colleague and friend for over 30 years. They had started at First Lakeside Bank together as young men and had risen through the ranks side by side. When Harold died, Walter had been the executor of his will and had helped me navigate the complex financial arrangements that my husband had put in place. Arrangements that I had never shared with Olivia or Curtis. "Margaret?" Walter's familiar, gravelly voice answered on the third ring. "Is everything all right? It's almost 9 o'clock. "No, Walter, everything is not all right," I replied quietly, mindful of the thin walls. "I need your help. It's time to activate Harold's contingency plan." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "I've been wondering when you'd call. Harold always said you'd wait until things got bad before asking for help. What did that son-in-law of yours do?" "They've taken everything, Walter. The house, my independence, even my dignity. And now they're using my home as collateral for their new construction project." "Meet me tomorrow at the Lakeside Brew, 10 o'clock, Walter said, his tone shifting from friendly to businesslike. "Bring whatever documentation you have of the transfer and their financial arrangements. And, Margaret, don't let them know you've called me." After hanging up, I sat in the dimly lit sunroom, listening to the party wind down. My thin mattress on the fold-out sofa bed creaked as I shifted my weight. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. I had taught advanced mathematics for 30 years, managed our household finances even before Harold's death, and maintained a stock portfolio that had outperformed many professional investors. Yet here I was, deemed too incompetent to operate a modern thermostat or manage a checking account. The next morning, I waited until Olivia left for her job at the regional hospital, and Curtis departed for his real estate office before calling a taxi. Another freedom they had taken. My car had been sold 3 weeks after I signed over the house deemed too dangerous for someone with my condition. The Lakeside Brew was busy with the morning rush when I arrived. Walter was already there, his imposing figure easily spotted at a corner table. At 78, he still maintained the commanding presence that had served him well in the banking world. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, his tweed jacket impeccable, and his eyes sharp behind tortoiseshell glasses. "Margaret," he stood as I approached, pulling out a chair for me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're looking well, despite everything." "I look like what I am. A woman who's been sleeping in an unheated sunroom in the middle of a Michigan winter," I replied dryly, unwinding my scarf. "But I'm still here, still thinking clearly, despite what my daughter and son-in-law would have everyone believe." Walter signaled for the waitress and ordered coffee for both of us. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." For the next hour, I detailed the events of the past several months, the subtle manipulation, the constant undermining of my confidence, the gradual isolation from friends and community, and finally, the transfer of my home and assets. I showed him the papers I had managed to secret away, the deed transfer, the mortgage documents listing my house as collateral, the new account statements showing the redirection of my Social Security payments. Walter listened intently, occasionally, making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. When I finished, he sat back, a familiar expression on his face, the one Harold used to call his banker's assessment. "They've been thorough, I'll give them that," he said finally. "But they made one critical mistake." "What's that?" "They underestimated you, Margaret, and they knew nothing about Harold's contingency plans." He opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Harold always believed in preparing for every possibility. When he set up your estate plan, he created what we called the rainy day provisions, assets held separately from your joint accounts, investments that weren't on any of the regular statements, a trust that only activated under specific conditions." My eyes filled with tears as I recognized Harold's handwriting on some of the documents. Even from beyond the grave, he was still protecting me. "The bottom line," Walter continued, his voice gentle but firm, "is that you have resources they know nothing about. Significant resources. Enough to not only secure your independence but to teach them a rather pointed lesson if that's what you choose to do." "What exactly are we talking about, Walter?" He slid a statement across the table. The total at the bottom, nearly $2.4 million, made me catch my breath. Harold believed that everyone should have a secret fund, something no one else knew about. He called it insurance against human nature. This particular account was set up in a trust that only you can access, but it doesn't appear on any of the regular financial disclosures that Olivia or Curtis might have seen. I stared at the statement, emotions washing over me in waves, gratitude for Harold's foresight, anger at Olivia and Curtis's deception, and underneath it all, a growing sense of determination. "There's more," Walter said, producing another document. Harold also set up a separate corporate entity, Lakeside Holdings LLC. On paper, it's a property investment company. In reality, it's another vehicle for you to manage assets without direct connection to your personal finances. And what can this company do? Walter's smile reminded me of Harold's when he was about to make a particularly shrewd business move. Anything a company can do: purchase property, make investments, extend loans, or buy mortgages. The implication hit me. Curtis and Olivia's mortgage. Precisely. With the right timing and a bit of financial maneuvering, Lakeside Holdings could purchase the mortgage on their current home, the one they took out 3 years ago when they first bought the property. They'd never know who was behind the transaction. Banks sell mortgages all the time. And once we own the mortgage, then you, as the managing member of Lakeside Holdings, would have certain options. The coffee between us had grown cold, but I barely noticed. For the first time in months, I felt warmth spreading through me. The heat of purpose, of righteous anger controlled and channeled. What would Harold advise in this situation? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Walter leaned forward. Harold would say that in business, as in chess, you must think several moves ahead. He would advise patience, careful planning, and remembering that the goal isn't just winning, it's winning in a way that prevents the same battle from happening again. I nodded, straightening my shoulders. I need to know everything about Curtis's real estate development, the one he's using my house as collateral for. And I need to understand exactly what financial position they're in right now. For the next 2 hours, Walter and I developed a plan. As a former bank vice president with connections throughout Lakeside's financial community, he had access to information and resources that would be invaluable. Curtis, ambitious but relatively new to large-scale development, had left a paper trail that told an interesting story, one of overextension, questionable financial projections, and a business model that relied heavily on appearance rather than substance. His current project, this Lakeside Estates development, is leveraged to the hilt, Walter explained, showing me the public records he had pulled. He's counting on pre-sales to fund the actual construction, but interest has been slower than projected. That's why he needed your house as additional collateral. Their primary lender was getting nervous. And Olivia? What's her financial situation? On paper, solid. Her position at the hospital pays well. But their lifestyle... He shook his head. The country club membership, the luxury car leases, the vacations to Bora Bora last year. They're spending well beyond their means, Margaret. Classic case of keeping up appearances. I thought of the lavish dinner parties, the expensive renovations, to my home, the constant references to their connections and status in the community. It all made sense now. They weren't just cruel, they were desperate. Before leaving the coffee shop, we agreed on next steps. Walter would begin the process of activating Lakeside Holdings and investigating the purchase of Curtis and Olivia's mortgage. I would return to my sunroom prison and continue playing the role of the confused elderly mother, while gathering additional evidence of their intentions for my property. Be careful, Margaret, Walter warned as we parted. People who are desperate financially can be unpredictable. Don't let them suspect anything until we're ready to move. I nodded, suddenly aware of how high the stakes had become. This wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity or teaching my daughter a lesson. It was about protecting the legacy that Harold and I had built, a legacy that was meant to provide security, not fuel Curtis's risky ventures. As the taxi drove me back to Maple Street, I gazed out at Lakeside, the small town where Harold and I had built our lives, raised our daughter, and planned for a future we thought was secure. The familiar landmarks passed by, the lake where we'd taught Olivia to swim, the park where we'd celebrated countless 4th of July picnics, the church where we'd renewed our vows on our 40th anniversary. How had we come to this? My own daughter, who had been raised with values of honesty and respect, now conspiring with her husband to strip me of my home and independence under the guise of concern for my well-being. The taxi pulled up to the house, my house, regardless of whose name was now on the deed. Through the large bay window, I could see that Curtis was home unexpectedly, pacing in the living room while talking animatedly on his phone. His gestures were agitated, his expression tense. I paid the driver and walked slowly up the path, my cane tapping on the flagstones that Harold had laid by hand. As I approached the door, Curtis's voice became clearer. I don't care what the bank's policy is. We need that construction loan approved by the end of the week. Yes, I understand the pre-sales are below target. but we have additional collateral now. My mother-in-law's house, fully paid off, probably worth $400,000 in this market. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. So the development was in even more trouble than Walter had suspected. Curtis was scrambling, using my home, my life's investment, as a bargaining chip in his desperate financial gamble. I deliberately made noise entering, giving him time to end his call and compose himself. By the time I shuffled into the living room, his businessman's mask was back in place. "Margaret, I didn't expect you to be out today." His tone carried false cheerfulness. "Olivia mentioned you were feeling a bit confused this morning." I had said nothing to Olivia about feeling confused. Another fabrication to justify their control. "Just needed some fresh air," I replied mildly. "The sunroom gets stuffy." Of course. He glanced at his watch. "Did you, go somewhere specific? Olivia worries when you wander off. Alone." "Just to the park," I lied. "To feed the ducks like Harold and I used to do." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Well, next time, let someone know. Maybe Marissa can take you." Marissa was the college student they hired to check on me 3 times a week, their euphemism for having me monitored. "I'll try to remember," I said, infusing my voice with just the right amount of vague distraction. "Is that a new painting?" The diversion worked. Curtis launched into an explanation of the modern art piece they'd recently hung where my family, portraits had once been, an investment piece by an up-and-coming artist that would certainly appreciate in value. I nodded and made appropriate noises of interest while mentally calculating how long it would take Walter to implement our plan. Curtis's urgency about the construction loan suggested a timeline that worked in our favor. The more desperate he became, the less carefully he would examine the details of any financial lifeline thrown his way. "Would you like some tea, Curtis?" I asked, interrupting his monologue about contemporary art valuation. He blinked, surprised by the offer. In recent months, I had rarely initiated any interaction with him. Sure, Margaret. That would be nice." In the kitchen, my kitchen, where I had prepared thousands of meals over the decades, I moved deliberately, letting him see me hesitate over which cabinet held the tea, knowing it would reinforce his perception of my decline. "Curtis," I said, as I waited for the kettle to boil, "I've been thinking about what you and Olivia said about my finances being too complicated for me to manage now." His interest sharpened visibly. "Yes?" "You might be right," I conceded, watching his expression brighten. "There are some investment accounts Harold set up that I don't fully understand. Would you like me to show you the statements? Perhaps you could explain them to me." The eagerness that flashed across his face confirmed everything I needed to know. "Absolutely, Margaret. I'd be happy to help you make sense of all that. Financial planning is part of what I do, after all." "Wonderful. I believe I still have some paperwork in my old files in the basement. When Olivia gets home, perhaps we could all look through them together." Curtis was already reaching for his phone. "Let me text her. I'm sure she can come home a little early for something this important." As I poured the tea, a sense of calm purpose settled over me. The game was in motion. Curtis and Olivia believed I was finally relinquishing the last of my financial independence. In reality, I was setting the stage for them to reveal the full extent of their intentions. By the time Olivia arrived home an hour later, Curtis had cleared the dining room table and prepared what he called a financial review station, complete with his laptop, calculator, and various forms he'd printed. "Mom, this is so responsible." "Of you," Olivia gushed, hugging me with artificial enthusiasm. "I'm so proud of you for recognizing that you need help with these complex matters." I returned her hug weakly, noting how she exchanged a triumphant glance with Curtis over my shoulder. "I just want everything to be clear," I murmured. "Your father would have wanted things properly managed." "Exactly," Curtis agreed, pulling out a chair for me at what had once been my own dining table. "Now, where are these investment statements?" "You mentioned?" In the basement filing cabinet, I think, the one with the blue labels. As Olivia went to retrieve them, Curtis leaned toward me confidentially. This is the right decision, Margaret. Financial management gets more complex every year, and with your cognitive challenges, it's easy to make costly mistakes. I nodded, docilely, thinking of the $2.4 million in assets they knew nothing about and the financial trap that Walter was currently setting. We only want what's best for you, he continued, his practiced sincerity almost convincing. And honestly, consolidating your assets with our overall family financial strategy makes the most sense. We can ensure your care needs are met while optimizing growth potential. Translation: they would absorb whatever resources they discovered into their own financial mess, justifying it as family asset management, while continuing to relegate me to the sunroom. Olivia returned with a file box, looking puzzled. Mom, I only found statements from 2015 and earlier. Where are the current ones? I frowned, manufacturing a look of confusion. Aren't they there? Perhaps in the red folders? Another trip to the basement. Another return with outdated information. Curtis's patience was beginning to fray. Margaret, we need current statements, the most recent accounts. Do you remember where you might have put them? I pressed a hand to my forehead. It's all so confusing since you rearranged everything. Maybe they're in the attic? Or did I give them to someone for safekeeping? Olivia and Curtis exchanged concerned looks, exactly the reaction I'd intended. Mom, did you give your financial statements to someone? Who would that be? I allowed my gaze to wander, as if struggling to focus. Maybe Walter? Harold always trusted Walter with important papers. Walter Freeman? Dad's old colleague? Olivia clarified, her voice sharpening. I nodded vaguely. He helped with some paperwork after your father died. Such a kind man. Curtis was all ready, typing the name into his phone, likely searching for contact information. Do you still talk to Walter, Margaret? Occasionally, I replied. He calls to check on me sometimes. Or did he stop when you changed my phone number? Another exchanged glance between them, this one more worried. They had indeed changed my number months ago, ostensibly to give me a simpler plan, but effectively cutting me off from many long-time contacts. I think I should give Walter a call, Curtis said, rising from the table, just to check if he has any of your current financial information, for completeness. As he stepped into the next room to make the call, Olivia sat beside me, taking my hand in what was meant to be a comforting gesture but felt more like restraint. Mom, we're trying to help you, she said, her voice low and intense. You know, your memory isn't what it used to be. Remember when you left the stove on? Or when you got lost driving to the grocery store? The stove incident had been a simple accident of the type anyone might have. The getting lost had been a wrong turn. On a day when road construction had altered my usual route, hardly evidence of dementia. I know you mean well, dear, I said, patting her hand. I'm just trying to make sure everything is organized properly. Curtis returned, his expression tight. Walter Freeman is out of town until next week, according to his office. His assistant seemed surprised when I mentioned your name, Margaret. Said something about ongoing matters before catching herself. I hid my satisfaction. Walter was laying groundwork of his own. Well, I suppose we'll have to wait then, I said with a sigh. In the meantime, perhaps you could explain the renovation plans for my sunroom. It does get awfully cold at night. The abrupt change of subject threw them momentarily, but Curtis recovered quickly. Actually, we've been discussing that. The current setup was always meant to be temporary. Temporary has stretched to 3 months now, I observed mildly. Because we've been finalizing the plans for Lakeside Estates, Olivia jumped in. Once construction begins, things will move quickly. You'll have a beautiful new suite in our new home. And what happens to this house once you build your new one? I asked, deliberately making my voice quaver. Curtis cleared his throat. Well, The current market makes it an ideal time to sell. Property values in Lakeside have never been higher in this location. Sell? I interrupted, allowing genuine emotion to color my voice. But this is our family home, where your father and I raised you, Olivia, where all our memories are. Mom, we've discussed this, Olivia said, her tone taking on the patronizing quality I'd grown to despise. The house is too big for just you. Too outdated, too much maintenance, and since it's now in our name, for safekeeping, I interjected. Because you were worried about my cognitive state. Exactly, Curtis said smoothly. And part of our responsibility is making sound financial decisions about all family assets. The capital from selling this property will secure our position in Lakeside Estates and ensure there's plenty set aside for your care needs. There it was, the full extent of their plan laid bare. They had no intention of preserving my home or honoring its significance. It was merely an asset to be liquidated, a solution to their financial overextension. I let my shoulders slump, presenting the defeated posture they expected. I see. Well, if you think it's best. I just hope I'll be allowed to keep some of my personal items when you sell. The flash of guilt on Olivia's face was quickly masked. Of course, Mom. Whatever fits in your new space. Curtis was already refocusing on the original topic. About those investment accounts. Maybe check your email? Harold might have set up online access. I shook my head. You took away my computer, remember? Said it was too confusing for me. The reminder hung in the air, an uncomfortable truth, about just how systematically they had isolated and infantilized me. We'll figure it out, Olivia said finally. Maybe after Walter returns. As they began packing up their financial review station, I excused myself to rest in my sunroom. The performance had been exhausting, but productive. I now had confirmation of their intentions directly from their own mouths, and I had planted the seed about Walter's involvement, a small warning shot across their bow. Alone in my sunroom as evening fell, I watched the lights come on in neighboring houses. Families gathering for dinner, lives continuing in their comfortable routines. From my window, I could see Florence Wilson next door, an 82-year-old widow, who had been my friend for decades. She had witnessed my gradual relegation to the sunroom with growing concern, even offering her guest room when she realized how cold my space became at night, an offer Olivia had firmly declined on my behalf. I pulled out my hidden flip phone, not the one they had given me, but one Walter had provided today, pre-programmed with essential contacts. The first phase of our plan was complete. I had confirmed their intentions and planted the seed of Walter's involvement. Now it was time for phase 2. I dialed Walter's number, watching Curtis and Olivia through the window as they moved about the kitchen, likely discussing how to locate my hidden assets. Little did they know that while they were planning to sell my home out from under me, I was preparing to reclaim not just my house, but my dignity and independence. When Walter answered, I kept my voice low. It's time, Walter. They've confirmed everything we suspected. They're planning to sell the house as soon as the Lakeside Estates project breaks ground. Then we'll need to move quickly, he replied. I've already initiated the process with Lakeside Holdings. By this time next week, we'll own their mortgage. The question is, Margaret, how far do you want to take this? I watched as Curtis put his arm around Olivia in the kitchen, both of them laughing about something, comfortable and confident in the home they had taken from me, making plans for the money they would extract from its sale. All the way, Walter, I said, my resolve hardening. They chose to treat me like a senile old woman incapable of managing her affairs. I think it's time they learned exactly what this old mathematics teacher is still capable of calculating. As twilight deepened over Lakeside, I felt a sense of calm purpose replace the helpless anger I had carried for months. Margaret Parker was not finished yet, not by a long shot. 5 days after my meeting with Walter, a thick manila envelope arrived at the house, addressed to me. Olivia collected the mail that morning and brought the envelope to the sunroom, curiosity evident in her expression. "What's this, Mom? Something from the bank?" I took the envelope, recognizing Walter's handwriting immediately. "Just some pension paperwork, I believe. Harold set up several small annuities that send documentation periodically." She lingered as I opened it, clearly hoping to glimpse the contents. Inside were exactly what Walter and I had planned. Statements for several modest investments, enough to pique Curtis's interest, but not so substantial as to satisfy his ambitions. The real documents, the ones detailing the $2.4 million trust, and the formation of Lakeside Holdings LLC, were safely stored in Walter's office. "Would you like me to help you understand those?" Olivia offered, her tone carrying that distinctive note of condescension that had become familiar over the past months. "That would be lovely, dear. Perhaps after dinner? I think I'll rest now." I clutched the papers to my chest, playing the role of the confused elderly woman they expected me to be. Once Olivia left, I carefully examined the statements Walter had prepared. They showed several investments totaling approximately $180,000, a significant sum, but only a fraction of my actual resources. These were the breadcrumbs we were laying to distract Curtis and Olivia, while the real plan unfolded behind the scenes. That evening, as expected, both Curtis and Olivia hovered attentively as I spread the statements across the dining room table. Curtis could barely contain his excitement as he reviewed the figures. "These are solid investments, Margaret," he said, a new respect in his voice that had nothing to do with me as a person and everything to do with the dollar signs before him. "Blue-chip stocks, treasury bonds, a small but respectable portfolio." "Harold always was good with money," I replied mildly. "He handled most of our investments." "Did he mention any other accounts?" Curtis asked, trying to sound casual. Sometimes people of his generation diversified across multiple institutions for security. I furrowed my brow, pretending to struggle with recollection. "There might have been something with First Lakeside Bank. Walter would know. He and Harold worked together for so long." Olivia and Curtis exchanged glances. "We should definitely speak with Walter when he returns," Curtis said, "just to make sure we have a complete picture of your financial situation." "Of course," I agreed. "Walter has always looked out for my interests. Such a good friend to our family." The slight stiffening in Curtis's posture told me he'd caught my emphasis on my interests. Good. I wanted to plant seeds of uncertainty, small hints that perhaps I wasn't quite as helpless or confused as they believed. Over the next week, I maintained my docile facade while Walter worked behind the scenes. According to our daily phone calls, conducted when I was supposedly taking my afternoon walks around the neighborhood, the plan was progressing perfectly. Lakeside Holdings LLC had successfully negotiated with First Lakeside Bank to purchase Curtis and Olivia's mortgage. The sale would be completed by Friday, and Curtis would receive the standard notification that his loan had been sold to a new servicer, a common enough occurrence in the mortgage industry that it shouldn't raise immediate suspicions. Meanwhile, I gathered more evidence of their intentions for my home. One evening, I accidentally walked into Curtis's home office, formerly Harold's study, while he was on the phone with a contractor discussing plans for my house once they moved to Lakeside Estates. "The property will need significant updates before listing," he was saying. "The kitchen is functional but dated, bathrooms need complete overhauls, and that sunroom is barely up to code. But with the location and lot size, we should still clear enough to cover our position and then some." I deliberately made noise, alerting him to my presence. He spun around, quickly ending his call. "Margaret, you startled me. Is everything okay?" "I was looking for my reading glasses," I explained, blinking owlishly. "I thought I might have left them in here earlier." Curtis relaxed, believing my excuse. "No problem. Let me help you look." As he made a show of checking the surfaces of the desk and bookshelves, I noticed the construction plans for Lakeside Estates spread across his desk, the development that would supposedly include a proper suite for me. Is that the new house? I asked, pointing to the blueprints. Yes, Curtis said, smoothly shifting into his sales persona. Beautiful, isn't it? 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, open-concept living spaces, and state-of-the-art energy efficiency. I scanned the plans, noting something significant. I don't see my suite. His smile faltered momentarily. It's, on the lower level. A separate entrance here, see? He pointed to a small space that, based on my years of living in a house, built by Harold, who had known construction inside and out, was clearly little more than a basement room with a bathroom. No kitchen, minimal windows, essentially an upgraded version of the current sunroom. That looks quite small, I observed. Cozy, Curtis corrected quickly. Low maintenance, easy to navigate. We've been very thoughtful about designing a space that accommodates your changing needs. I nodded, pretending to accept his explanation while mentally adding this discovery to the growing list of their deceptions. There was never going to be a proper suite for me in the new house. If they succeeded in selling my home, I would be relegated to an even more isolated existence in a basement room, further from my friends and community, more completely under their control. How thoughtful, I murmured. Harold would be pleased to see you taking such care with planning. A flicker of discomfort crossed Curtis's face at the mention of my late husband. Harold had never particularly warmed to Curtis, having detected the opportunistic streak beneath his polished exterior. Curtis had always claimed to respect Harold immensely, but that respect hadn't extended to honoring his wishes for his widow's welfare. Found them, Curtis announced, producing a pair of reading glasses from behind a stack of books. Not actually mine, but similar enough that he expected me not to notice the difference. Here you go, Margaret. I accepted them with appropriate gratitude and shuffled back to my sunroom, my determination strengthened by what I'd learned. The game Curtis and Olivia were playing had no place for my dignity or comfort, only for what financial advantage they could extract from my existence. Friday arrived, crisp and clear. Walter called in the morning to confirm that Lakeside Holdings LLC was now officially the holder of Curtis and Olivia's mortgage. The notification would be delivered electronically to Curtis's email by noon, followed by formal paperwork within a few days. How do you want to proceed, Margaret? Walter asked. We have several options now. Let's wait until they receive the notification, I decided. I want to observe their reaction before we make our next move. Sure enough, at 12:37, Curtis stormed into the house, slamming the front door with enough force to rattle the windows. From my sunroom, I could hear him calling for Olivia, his voice tight with controlled panic. Our mortgage was sold, he announced when she arrived home 20 minutes later. To some company I've never heard of, Lakeside Holdings LLC. I've been trying to research them all afternoon, but there's almost nothing online. Just a business registration from about 3 years ago. Is that unusual? Olivia asked. I thought mortgages get sold all the time. Yes, but typically to known entities, larger banks, established mortgage servicers. This came out of nowhere. And the timing is... He lowered his voice, but I could still hear him. The timing is concerning, given our plans for the Lakeside Estates project. The construction loan is hanging by a thread, and now this unknown entity controls our primary residence mortgage. I allowed myself a small smile. Curtis, with his background in real estate, understood the implications better than most would. The new holder of their mortgage had significant power that could be exercised if payments were late or terms were violated. That evening, Curtis made a show of inviting me to join them for dinner in the dining room, a rare occurrence. Since my banishment to the sunroom, the table was set with the good china, and Olivia had prepared my favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables, an obvious attempt to butter me up. We've been thinking, Mom, Olivia began after serving the food. You've seemed a bit isolated lately in the sunroom. Perhaps we were too hasty in moving you out there. Oh? I took a small bite of pot roast, savoring both the tender meat and the transparent attempt at manipulation. Yes, Curtis jumped in. Families should stick together, support each other. In fact, we've been discussing the possibility of renovating the guest room upstairs for you. Much more comfortable, don't you think? That's very considerate, I replied. What prompted this change of heart? They exchanged glances and Curtis cleared his throat. Well, frankly, Margaret, after reviewing those investment statements, we realized we may have underestimated your financial situation. It seems your portfolio is quite solid, thanks to Harold's prudent planning. And we feel terrible about any suggestion that you can't manage your own affairs, Olivia added, reaching for my hand across the table. You've always been so capable, Mom. I nearly laughed at the transparency of their reversal. The $180,000 in investments Walter had revealed to them, a mere fraction of my actual assets, had been enough to transform me from a burdensome, confused old woman to a capable family member deserving of an upstairs bedroom. That's very kind, I said. Though I'm curious about what this means for your plans to sell this house once Lakeside Estates is built. I overheard you discussing updates needed before listing. Curtis nearly choked on his wine. You heard, well, that was just preliminary. Thinking, Margaret. Nothing definite. Besides, Olivia interjected smoothly, those plans are currently on hold. There have been some complications with the development. The construction loan? I asked innocently. Curtis's eyebrows shot up. You know about that. I shrugged. I may be old, Curtis, but I still have functioning ears. And contrary to what you and Olivia seem to believe, my cognitive abilities are quite intact. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. For the first time since this charade began, I had directly challenged their narrative about my mental state. Mom, Olivia finally said, her voice taking on the soothing tone one might use with a child. We've only ever wanted what's best for you. If we've been overprotective, it's because we love you. Is that why you sold my car without consulting me? Changed my phone number and restricted my visitors? Moved me to an unheated sunroom and took control of my Social Security deposits? I kept my voice even, refusing to display the anger that had fueled me for months. Those decisions seem less about protection and more about control. Curtis's face hardened, the mask of concerned son-in-law slipping. Margaret, I think you're being unfair. We've made sacrifices to care for you in our home. My home, I corrected quietly. The home Harold and I paid off 20 years ago. The home you convinced me to sign over to you because I was supposedly too confused to manage my own affairs. Olivia's eyes widened. Mom, you're twisting things. You agreed that living alone wasn't safe anymore, especially after the stove incident. One burned pot in 47 years of cooking, I noted. Hardly evidence of dementia. Curtis set down his fork with a clink. Where is this coming from, Margaret? Have you been talking to someone? Walter Freeman, perhaps? And there it was, the fear that I might have resources or information beyond their control. I decided to let them stew in that uncertainty. Walter has always been a good friend to this family, I replied. Harold trusted him implicitly, as do I. The rest of dinner passed in strained conversation, with Curtis and Olivia making obvious efforts to steer the discussion back to safer topics. The weather, community news, anything but my financial autonomy or the status of the house. I played along, presenting the compliant exterior they expected while observing the tension building between them. Several times they exchanged significant glances, clearly planning to discuss my unexpected assertiveness once I was safely back, in the sunroom. After dinner, I declined their offer to watch television in the living room, another transparent attempt to mollify me, and returned to my cold quarters. Once alone, I called Walter from my secret phone. They received the notification, I confirmed, and suddenly they're falling over themselves to improve my living conditions. They even offered to move me back into the main house. Walter chuckled. Amazing how discovering you have some financial resources has transformed you from a burden to a valued family member in their eyes. They're panicking about the mortgage transfer, I added. Curtis has been researching Lakeside Holdings all afternoon. He won't find much, Walter assured me. The LLC is registered with minimal public information, as is standard for privacy purposes. All completely legal, but frustrating for someone trying to figure out who now holds their mortgage. What's our next move? I asked. That depends on what outcome you want, Margaret. We could simply use this position as leverage to force them to return the house to your name and restore your financial autonomy. Or we could teach them a more pointed lesson, I finished for him. Exactly. Lakeside Holdings, as the mortgage holder, has certain rights if the borrower violates terms of the loan agreement. His tone was carefully neutral, presenting options, without pushing me in either direction. I thought about the months of indignity I had endured. The cold nights in the sunroom, the condescending tones, the isolation from friends, the systematic dismantling of my independence. I thought about Curtis's phone call with the contractor, casually discussing how to extract maximum profit from selling my beloved home. I thought about the basement suite in their planned mansion, another relegated space designed to keep me out of sight and under control. Let's review the terms of their mortgage, I decided. I want to understand all our options before making a decision. The next morning, a Saturday, Curtis and Olivia were unusually attentive. Curtis offered to take me to breakfast at the local diner, something that hadn't happened since Harold's death. Olivia suggested a shopping trip to buy some new things, to brighten up your space. Their sudden solicitousness was almost comical in its transparency. I declined both offers, citing fatigue, and retreated to the sunroom. Through the window, I watched them conferring intensely on the back patio, Curtis gesticulating emphatically, while Olivia nodded, looking worried. No doubt they were discussing their new strategy for managing me, now that they suspected I might not be as helpless or isolated as they had assumed. Around noon, Walter arrived at the front door, briefcase in hand. Curtis answered, surprise evident in his voice. "Mr. Freeman, we weren't expecting you." "I've come to see Margaret," Walter replied, his authoritative bank executive persona firmly in place. "I understand she's been living in the sunroom. Perhaps you could show me there." I was waiting, seated in my one comfortable chair, when Curtis reluctantly ushered Walter into the sunroom. Olivia hovered in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Walter, how lovely to see you," I greeted him warmly. "Margaret." He took my hands in his, then looked pointedly around at the sparse, cold space. "I see your living situation is not what Harold would have wanted." Curtis cleared his throat. "Actually, we were just discussing moving Margaret back into the main house. The sunroom was always intended as a temporary arrangement." "For 3 months?" Walter raised an eyebrow. "In a Michigan winter?" Olivia stepped forward. "Mr. Freeman, I'm not sure why you're here, but Mom's living arrangements are a family matter." Walter set his briefcase on the small table beside my chair and clicked it open. "I'm here in my capacity as trustee of Harold Parker's estate and as Margaret's financial advisor, roles I've held since Harold's passing 5 years ago." Curtis's expression sharpened. "Financial advisor? Margaret never mentioned that." "Didn't she?" Walter removed several documents from his briefcase. "Well, perhaps her cognitive decline affected her memory of our regular consultations. Though I must say, in our meetings, I've never observed any significant impairment of Margaret's mental faculties." The pointed reference to their claims about my mental state hung in the air. Olivia flushed, while Curtis maintained a rigid smile. "What exactly is the purpose of this visit?" Curtis asked. Walter handed me a folder. "Margaret asked me to review certain financial arrangements that have been made regarding her property and assets. I've completed that review and am here to discuss the findings with her, and with you, if Margaret wishes." I opened the folder, already knowing what it contained. a complete analysis of Curtis and Olivia's financial situation, including their overextended credit, the precarious status of the Lakeside Estates development, and most significantly, the details of their mortgage, which was now held by Lakeside Holdings LLC. "I'd like Curtis and Olivia to stay," I said. "This concerns them as well." Walter nodded and proceeded to lay out the situation in the precise, methodical manner that had made him an excellent banker. He explained how the transfer of my house to their names had been legally executed, but under ethically questionable circumstances. Given the lack of independent assessment of my cognitive ability, he detailed how my Social Security payments had been redirected without proper authorization. He outlined the current status of the Lakeside Estates development, including the concerning loan-to-value ratios and the stalled construction loan approval. Curtis's face grew increasingly flushed as Walter spoke, while Olivia's complexion went pale. Neither interrupted, perhaps stunned by the thoroughness of the information Walter had compiled. "Finally," Walter said, removing one last document from his briefcase, "there's the matter of your mortgage, which was recently purchased by Lakeside Holdings LLC." "What does that have to do with anything?" Curtis asked, his voice tight. Walter adjusted his glasses. "Lakeside Holdings has conducted a review of your mortgage agreement and has identified several concerning issues. There appears to be a misrepresentation of assets on the original application, specifically regarding the source of the down payment funds. Additionally, the property has been used as collateral for another loan without proper notification to the mortgage holder, which constitutes a technical default under the terms of the agreement." Curtis stood abruptly. "This is absurd. Our mortgage is in good standing. We've never missed a payment." "Payment history is only one aspect of mortgage compliance," Walter noted calmly. "The terms also prohibit certain actions regarding the EIE property, including using it as collateral without notification and approval." "So what are you saying?" Olivia asked, her voice small. Walter looked to me, indicating that this was my moment to take control. I straightened in my chair, shedding the hunched posture I had adopted for months as part of my performance as the helpless elderly mother. "What we're saying, Olivia, is that you and Curtis have been playing a dangerous game. You convinced me I was mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs, took control of my home and finances, and relegated me to this unheated sunroom while planning to sell the house out from under me." "Mom, that's not fair," Olivia began. I held up my hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Let me finish. You miscalculated in two critical ways. First, you assumed my mental capacity was failing when it absolutely was not. I have been fully aware of your manipulations from the beginning. Second, and more importantly, you underestimated the financial safeguards Harold put in place to protect me from exactly this kind of situation." Curtis's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Lakeside Holdings LLC," Walter explained, "is a company established by Harold Parker 3 years before his death and placed in a trust for Margaret's benefit. Margaret is the sole managing member and beneficiary." The realization dawned on Curtis's face with almost comical slowness. You own our mortgage?" "Yes," I confirmed, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. "I do." Olivia collapsed into a chair, her face ashen. "This can't be happening." "But it is," I said. "And now we need to discuss where we go from here, because Lakeside Holdings, which is to say I, have several options regarding your mortgage, given the technical default Walter has identified." Curtis ran a hand through his hair, his confident demeanor completely shattered. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I want what was taken from me," I replied simply. "My home, my independence, my dignity." "You can have the house back," Olivia said, quickly. "We'll sign it over immediately." "That's a start," I acknowledged. "But it doesn't address the financial exploitation that has occurred over the past 3 months. My Social Security payments that were redirected. The car that was sold without my permission. the personal items that were stored in the basement, or discarded. Walter removed a final document from his briefcase. We've prepared a comprehensive agreement that would resolve these issues. It includes returning the house to Margaret's name, financial restitution for misappropriated funds, and most importantly, a clear acknowledgement that Margaret is mentally competent to manage her own affairs. Curtis took the document, scanning it with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to reading contracts. His jaw tightened as he reached the final pages. This also requires us to vacate the property within 30 days. Yes, I confirmed. I think it's best if we no longer live together, don't you? Given the breach of trust that has occurred. Olivia began to cry, whether from genuine remorse or the shock of consequences finally catching up with their actions. I couldn't be sure. Mom, please. We made mistakes, but we're family. Where will we go? That's not my primary concern, I replied, finding strength in speaking the truth after months of calculated submission. You and Curtis created this situation. You'll need to find your own solution, just as I've had to do since you decided I was too senile to manage my own affairs. Curtis dropped the document on the table, his expression hardening. This is vindictive. If you push this, you'll destroy any chance of maintaining a relationship with your daughter. Curtis! Olivia looked shocked at his bluntness. I met his gaze steadily. No, Curtis. You and Olivia damaged that relationship when you chose to manipulate and exploit me rather than treat me with the respect I deserve. I'm simply establishing boundaries that should never have been crossed. The standoff continued for several moments, Curtis glaring, Olivia tearful, Walter impassive, and me, finally, in control of my own destiny again. You have 24 hours to sign the agreement, I said finally. After that, Lakeside Holdings will proceed with foreclosure based on the terms violation. Walter has already prepared the paperwork. You wouldn't, Olivia whispered. I looked at my daughter, feeling a complex mixture of disappointment, anger, and lingering love despite everything. I sincerely hope it doesn't come to that. But I've learned over these past months that hope is not a strategy. I trusted you to honor your father's memory and care for me with dignity. That trust was misplaced. Now I'm taking back what's mine, one way or another. Curtis snatched up the agreement. We need time to review this with our attorney. Of course, Walter said smoothly. Though I should mention that the issues with your mortgage application that I referenced earlier, specifically the misrepresentation of assets, could potentially involve regulatory authorities if brought to their attention. The agreement includes a clause whereby Margaret agrees not to pursue those concerns further, provided the terms are met. The veiled threat was clear. If they fought this, the consequences could extend beyond losing the house to potential legal problems. Curtis's jaw worked as he processed this information. We'll be in touch, he said finally, guiding a still weeping Olivia from the sunroom. Once they were gone, Walter sat in the chair opposite mine. That went about as expected. I released a long, slow breath, feeling as though I had been holding it for months. Do you think they'll sign? They don't have much choice, Walter replied. Curtis is smart enough to recognize when he's been outmaneuvered. The question is whether his pride will let him concede gracefully, or if he'll try some desperate countermove. And Olivia? I couldn't keep the hint of maternal concern from my voice, despite everything. Walter's expression softened. She's been following Curtis's lead throughout this from what you've told me. Perhaps this will be a wake-up call. People can change, Margaret. Perhaps, I acknowledged, though I wasn't ready to embrace forgiveness just yet. For now, I'll be satisfied with getting my home and my life back. As Walter prepared to leave, promising to return the next day to check on the status of the agreement, I remained in the sunroom, looking out at the garden Harold and I had tended together for so many years. The rose bushes needed pruning, the bird feeders were empty, the stone path needed weeding. small tasks of home ownership that had been neglected during my decline. Soon, I thought. Soon this would all be mine again. Not just legally, but in every meaningful sense. I would sleep in my own bedroom, cook in my own kitchen, and most importantly, make my own decisions without manipulation or coercion. I had given my daughter and son-in-law a valuable lesson in underestimation. They had seen only a confused old woman, easy to control and exploit. They had failed to recognize the mathematics teacher who had managed complex household finances for decades, the wife of a banker who had absorbed financial knowledge through osmosis over a 43-year marriage, and most critically, the determination of a woman fighting for her dignity and independence. They had said I was too senile to manage my money. I had responded by buying their mortgage and reclaiming my power. Whether our relationship could ever recover remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: they would never underestimate me again. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift to Harold and me from his parents, chimed midnight as I sat alone in the sunroom, wrapped in multiple blankets against the persistent chill. Sleep eluded me. The confrontation with Curtis and Olivia had unleashed a torrent of emotions I'd suppressed during months of calculated submission: anger, vindication, and underneath it all, a profound sadness. I hadn't wanted our relationship to reach this point. Despite their betrayal, Olivia was still my only child, the little girl who had once crawled into our bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who had made me proud at every math competition, the woman who had held my hand at Harold's funeral. I had hoped that revealing the truth would somehow break through whatever influence Curtis held over her, that she might show genuine remorse or understanding. The tears in her eyes had seemed real enough, but were they for me or for herself? Was she crying over the pain she'd caused, or the consequences she now faced? The house had been silent for hours. After their hasty retreat from the sunroom, Curtis and Olivia had disappeared into their bedroom, formerly the master suite where Harold and I had spent 4 decades of married life. Muffled arguments had filtered down the hallway throughout the evening, punctuated by periods of intense silence. Once I'd heard the front door slam, followed by the sound of Curtis's car starting and driving away. He had returned approximately 2 hours later, the squeal of tires in the driveway suggesting his mood hadn't improved. My phone vibrated on the small side table. The secret phone Walter had provided, not the monitored one Curtis and Olivia had given me. The text was from Walter. "Can't sleep either. Call if you need to talk." The kindness in those few words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Walter had been Harold's closest friend, but in recent weeks he had become my champion, my strategist, my connection to the world beyond this chilly sunroom. I considered calling him, then decided against it. This sleepless night was a vigil of sorts, a transition between the woman I had pretended to be and the woman I was reclaiming. Dawn found me still awake, watching the gradual illumination of the garden as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. The birds began their morning chorus: sparrows, cardinals, the occasional blue jay with its strident call. Harold had loved those birds, spending hours each spring constructing elaborate feeders designed to foil the neighborhood squirrels. After his death, I had maintained the tradition, until Curtis declared the feeders unsightly and removed them. During one of his modernization projects, small losses accumulated over months, the bird feeders. The family photos replaced with abstract art. The comfortable furniture exchanged for sleek modern pieces that looked impressive but invited no lingering: my car, my phone, my social connections, my dignity. A soft knock on the sunroom door interrupted my reverie. I turned to see Olivia standing in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her face puffy from crying or lack of sleep. Perhaps both. "Mom?" Her voice was tentative. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the chair opposite mine. "Of course." She entered, hesitantly, perching on the edge of the chair as if afraid to fully commit to the conversation. For several moments, she simply looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in months. "You don't actually have dementia, do you?" she finally asked. "No," I confirmed. "I never did. But the stove incident, and getting lost driving, and forgetting people's names? Normal aging, Olivia. I'm 72, not 32. I occasionally misplace things or forget a name. I left a pot on the stove once, in decades of cooking. And I didn't get lost driving. I took a wrong turn when construction blocked my usual route." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Curtis," said his grandmother, showed the same early signs before she deteriorated. He was so convinced. "Curtis saw what he wanted to see," I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "And you chose to believe him rather than trust the mother who raised you." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was worried about you. Living alone after Dad died. You seemed so lost without him." "I was grieving, Olivia. That's different from cognitive decline." "I know that now," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom." The apology hung in the air between us, insufficient, yet necessary. I studied my daughter, trying to separate the manipulative woman who had conspired to take my home from the child I had raised and loved. "Where is Curtis?" I asked. She glanced toward the main house. "Upstairs, calling his lawyer." He was up, most of the night trying to figure out a way around the agreement Mr. Freeman presented. "And what do you think about the agreement?" Olivia hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. "It's fair," she admitted finally. "More than fair, given what we did. We should never have moved you out here, never taken control of your finances, never," her voice broke, "never treated you like you were incapable of managing your own life." Hope flickered within me. Perhaps Olivia was beginning to separate herself from Curtis's influence after all. "And the requirement to vacate the house?" Here, her resolve faltered. "That's the part Curtis is most upset about. The Lakeside Estates project is stalled, and with the mortgage situation. We don't have anywhere to go, Mom. Everything's tied up in the development." "That sounds like a problem of Curtis's making, not mine." "I know," she acknowledged, surprising me. "But he's my husband, for better or worse. Even when worse involves exploiting your elderly mother." The words came out sharper than intended. Olivia flinched but didn't retreat. "I'm not defending what we did. It was wrong. So wrong. But I need to find a way forward that doesn't destroy my marriage or my relationship with you. Is that even possible?" The raw vulnerability in her question caught me off guard. Before I could formulate a response, heavy footsteps announced Curtis's approach. He appeared in the doorway, fully dressed in what I recognized as his business crisis attire: tailored suit, crisp white shirt, power tie. The facade of control, even as his world unraveled. "Good morning, Margaret." His tone was coolly professional. "Olivia, I need to speak with you." "We're talking, Curtis," Olivia replied, not moving from her chair. His jaw tightened. "It's important. Our attorney is waiting for a callback." "You can say whatever you need to say here," she insisted. "Mom deserves to know what's happening." Curtis's expression darkened, but he entered the sunroom fully, maintaining his distance from me as if proximity might somehow weaken his position. "Fine. Our attorney has reviewed the agreement. He says Lakeside Holdings," he shot me a venomous glance, "is within its legal rights regarding the mortgage issue. The clause about misrepresentation of assets is particularly problematic." "Meaning?" Olivia prompted. Curtis's professional demeanor slipped momentarily, revealing the desperation beneath. "Meaning if we fight this, we could face more than foreclosure. There could be legal consequences that would affect my business license, my professional standing." "So we have to sign," Olivia concluded. "It appears so," he admitted grudgingly. "But I've negotiated an extension of the vacate period. 60 days instead of 30. Our attorney is drafting the addendum now. I folded my hands in my lap, outwardly calm despite my racing heart. I haven't agreed to any extension, Curtis. Be reasonable, Margaret. Finding suitable housing in Lakeside takes time, especially with the current market. 60 days is still extremely aggressive. 30 days was generous, considering you gave me less than a week to relocate to this sunroom, I pointed out. But I'll consider the extension under one condition. Curtis's expression grew wary. What condition? That you and Olivia separate until the house is vacated. What? Curtis nearly shouted. Olivia looked equally shocked. Mom, why? Because I will not spend another night in this freezing sunroom while you enjoy the comfort of the main house, I stated firmly. If you need 60 days to find new accommodations, that's fine, but one of you stays elsewhere during that period. The other can remain in the guest bedroom, not the master suite, which I will be reclaiming immediately. Curtis laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, Curtis. You created this situation when you decided I was too senile to manage my own affairs. Now you can live with the consequences. Olivia looked between us, clearly torn. Curtis, maybe we should... Don't even consider it, he snapped. This is our home, legally, until the new deed transfer is processed. We don't have to agree to this vindictive demand. I smiled thinly. Then I don't have to agree to the 60-day extension. Walter will be here at noon to collect the signed agreement, the original agreement, with the 30-day vacate clause intact. And should you refuse to sign at all, Lakeside Holdings will begin foreclosure proceedings tomorrow morning. Curtis's face flushed an alarming shade of red. For a moment, I wondered if he might actually lose control entirely. But his banker's son discipline held. You're bluffing, he said finally. You wouldn't do that to Olivia. I didn't create this situation, Curtis. You did. You and Olivia convinced me I was experiencing cognitive decline. You manipulated me into signing over my home. You relegated me to an unheated sunroom while planning to sell the house from under me. Every step of the way, you chose exploitation over respect. I turned to Olivia, who was watching with a stunned expression. I don't want to hurt you, but I will no longer be a victim in my own home. Those are my terms. One of you leaves today. The other moves to the guest room. I reclaim the master suite immediately. In exchange, you get 60 days to find new housing. Curtis grabbed Olivia's arm. We need to discuss this privately. She pulled away from his grasp. Stop it, Curtis. This isn't helping. She turned to me, her expression conflicted but resolute. I'll go stay with Emma. Emma Colton had been Olivia's friend since college, a pediatrician at the same hospital where Olivia worked as an administrator. Olivia, Curtis protested. It's the most practical solution, she said wearily. Emma has a spare room, and she's been offering it to me for girls' weekends for years. I'll stay there until we sort out our housing situation. Curtis stared at her as if she'd transformed into a stranger before his eyes. You're choosing her side? After everything we've built together? I'm choosing to acknowledge that we made a terrible mistake, Olivia replied, a new firmness in her voice. And now we need to make it right. Mom's terms are fair, Curtis. We're lucky she's not pressing charges for financial exploitation of an elderly person, which is exactly what we did, regardless of our intentions. The truth of her words seemed to hit Curtis like a physical blow. He stepped back, his confident facade crumbling further. This is going to destroy everything. The development, my reputation in the community. You should have thought of that before you decided to declare me incompetent without any medical evaluation, I said quietly. Actions have consequences, Curtis, even well-intentioned ones. He shot me a look of pure resentment before storming out of the sunroom. Moments later, we heard the front door slam, followed by the now familiar squeal of tires as his car accelerated down the driveway. Olivia and I sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the confrontation settling around us like heavy snow. "He'll calm down," she said finally, though her tone lacked conviction. "He just needs time to process." "And you?" I asked gently. "Are you processing?" She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about how this happened, how we went from concerned about your welfare to," she gestured vaguely at the sunroom, "to this. It was so gradual, each step seemed reasonable at the time. Curtis would suggest something, framing it as being for your protection, your safety, and I'd agree because it made sense through that lens. The road to exploitation is often paved with good intentions, I observed. Was it always just about the house? About using it as collateral for lakeside estates? I considered the question carefully. I don't think it started that way. I believe you were genuinely concerned after your father died. But at some point, concern became control, and Curtis recognized an opportunity. Olivia wiped away a tear. I feel so stupid, so ashamed. Dad would be furious with me. Your father believed in learning from mistakes, not dwelling on them, I said. He also believed in consequences. Like buying our mortgage? A hint of her old spirit flickered in her slight smile. Exactly like that. Harold always said the best defense is a good financial offense. We lapsed into silence again, but it felt different now. Less hostile, more contemplative. Olivia eventually stood, smoothing her nightgown. I should pack some things if I'm staying at Emma's, and I'll help you move your belongings back to the master suite. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by the offer. That would be appreciated. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Olivia, this doesn't have to be the end of our relationship, just the end of an unhealthy dynamic. She paused in the doorway, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I'd like that, Mom, more than anything. The rest of the morning passed, in a flurry of activity. True to her word, Olivia helped me reclaim the master bedroom, moving my clothing and personal items from the sunroom and retrieving boxes of my possessions from the basement. Some items were missing. Family photos Curtis had discarded during his modernization campaign, pieces of Harold's nautical collection that had apparently been sold. But the most important mementos had survived. Walter arrived promptly at noon, accompanied by Nathan Chen, his attorney. Curtis had not returned, but Olivia assured us he would be back for the document signing. He's meeting with the Lakeside Estates investors, she explained as we settled in the dining room. Trying to salvage what he can of the project? Walter nodded sympathetically. Real estate development is always risky, especially in a fluctuating market. Overextension can be fatal to even the most promising ventures. Olivia smiled ruefully. You sound just like Dad. He tried to warn Curtis about expanding too quickly, leveraging too heavily. Curtis thought he was being old-fashioned, risk-averse. Harold understood the difference between calculated risk and reckless gambling, Walter replied. A distinction many developers fail to appreciate until it's too late. Nathan Chen, a precise man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses and an immaculate suit, removed the revised agreement from his briefcase. Ms. Parker Daniels, will your husband be joining us soon? We have a rather tight schedule today. I'm here. Curtis's voice preceded him into the dining room. He looked disheveled, his earlier perfect appearance now rumpled, his tie loosened, his expression haggard. Let's get this over with. Curtis, Olivia began, concern evident in her voice. What happened with the investors? He laughed bitterly. What do you think happened? Once I explained that our personal mortgage is in default and we're being forced to vacate our primary residence, they pulled their backing. Lakeside Estates is officially dead. The venom in his glance toward me would have wounded me months ago. Now I simply met his gaze steadily, refusing to accept blame for consequences that stemmed directly from his own actions. Nathan cleared his throat. I understand this is a difficult situation, Mr. Daniels, but we should proceed with the agreement. I've incorporated the 60-day vacate extension as discussed, with the conditions stipulated by Mrs. Parker. Curtis dropped heavily into a chair. Whatever, where do I sign? The attorney walked us through the document methodically, explaining each section. The house would be transferred back to my name immediately. All financial accounts would be restored to my sole control. Curtis and Olivia acknowledged there was no medical evidence of cognitive decline and relinquished any claim to manage my affairs. Olivia would temporarily relocate to alternate housing, while Curtis would move to the guest bedroom, with both vacating the property completely within 60 days. Additionally, Nathan continued, the agreement includes a mutual non-disparagement clause. Neither party will speak negatively about the other regarding these matters, particularly in professional or community settings. Curtis looked up sharply. So we can't tell anyone she bought our mortgage and forced us out of our home? And I can't tell anyone that you declared me mentally incompetent without medical evaluation and relegated me to an unheated sunroom, I countered. The clause protects both parties, Curtis. He muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. Finally, Nathan concluded, in exchange for compliance with all terms, Lakeside Holdings agrees not to pursue any claims. Regarding the potential mortgage application misrepresentations we discussed earlier, Curtis took the pen Nathan offered, signing with an angry flourish before pushing the document toward Olivia. She signed more carefully, her hand slightly trembling. When it was my turn, I felt an unexpected sense of solemnity as I added my signature to the agreement. This document represented more than the return of my property and independence. It marked the formal acknowledgement of a breach of trust that had fundamentally altered my relationship with my daughter and son-in-law. It's done then, Walter said quietly as Nathan gathered the signed documents. Margaret, is there anything else you wish to address before we conclude? I looked at Curtis and Olivia. He slumped in defeat, she watching me with a mixture of shame and hope. Despite everything, these were still the people with whom I had shared a home, a family connection. The anger that had fueled me through months of indignity had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something more nuanced, a determination to rebuild my life on my own terms, without bitterness consuming me. Yes, I said, straightening in my chair. I want to be clear about something. What happened here was wrong. The manipulation, the exploitation, the lies, all of it was deeply harmful. But I don't want this agreement to be the final word in our relationship, Olivia. My daughter's eyes filled with tears. Mom? We have work to do, I continued. Trust to rebuild, boundaries to establish. That won't happen overnight, and it can't happen without genuine accountability. But I'm willing to try if you are. Olivia nodded, unable to speak through her emotions. Curtis remained stone-faced. Very magnanimous of you, Margaret, considering you've just destroyed my business and evicted us from our home. No, Curtis, I corrected gently. I reclaimed my home after you took it under false pretenses. There's a significant difference. As for your business, that was compromised long before I became involved. Over-leveraged developments fail because they're fundamentally unsound, not because investors discover uncomfortable truths. He stood abruptly. I need to pack my things. For the guest room, since we're all being so civilized about this nuclear option you've deployed. After he stalked from the room, Olivia sighed deeply. I'm sorry about him. He's not handling this well. Few people handle accountability well. When they've convinced themselves they're justified in their actions, Walter observed. Give him time. Nathan closed his briefcase with a decisive click. I'll file the property transfer paperwork this afternoon. The deed should be officially recorded within 3 business days. In the meantime, Mrs. Parker, this agreement is legally binding on all parties. Thank you, Nathan, Walter said, rising to shake the attorney's hand. Your efficiency in this matter is much appreciated. As Walter and Nathan prepared to leave, Olivia excused herself to begin packing for her stay at Emma's. I walked the men to the front door, experiencing a surreal sense of reclaiming my role as the mistress of my own home. "How are you feeling?" Walter asked quietly as we stood on the porch. I considered the question, taking in the familiar view of my front garden, the neighborhood where I had spent decades of my life. Relieved, sad, vindicated, uncertain. All of it at once, I suppose. He nodded understanding. "That's to be expected. This situation is complicated, emotionally and practically. Was I too harsh with the conditions? Separating them, reclaiming the master suite immediately?" Walter shook his head firmly. "You've been more than fair, Margaret. Remember, they were planning to sell this house out from under you and relegate you to a basement room in their new mansion. The consequences they're facing are directly proportional to their actions." Nathan, who had been discreetly checking his phone, looked up. "If I may, Mrs. Parker, in my professional experience, clear boundaries are essential after cases of financial exploitation, regardless of family connections. Your conditions establish those boundaries unequivocally." I thanked them both for their support and watched as they drove away, leaving me alone on the porch of the home I had nearly lost. The spring air carried the scent of blooming lilacs, Harold's favorite. We had planted those bushes together the year Olivia was born, creating a natural privacy screen along the property line. Inside, I could hear movement as Olivia packed, and Curtis presumably relocated his belongings to the guest room. Soon I would need to address practical matters, changing locks, restoring utility accounts to my name, reclaiming financial control of my various accounts. But for this moment, I allowed myself to simply stand on my porch, feeling the sun on my face and the weight of the past months beginning to lift from my shoulders. A car pulled into the driveway next door, and Florence Wilson emerged, my 82-year-old neighbor and friend. She spotted me on the porch and waved enthusiastically, making her way toward the low fence that separated our properties. "Margaret Parker, standing on your own porch in the middle of the day instead of hiding in that dreadful sunroom. I take it something has changed?" Florence had never bothered with subtle inquiries, a quality I had always appreciated about her. "Yes, Florence," I confirmed with a smile. "Quite a lot has changed, actually." "Hallelujah," she exclaimed, raising her hands skyward with theatrical relief. "That son-in-law of yours finally came to his senses about how he's been treating you?" "Not exactly," I replied. "Let's just say I helped adjust his perspective on a few important matters." Florence cackled with delight. "I knew you had something up your sleeve. You've been too calm about this whole arrangement, too calculating. Harold always said you were the strategic one in your partnership." Her mention of Harold brought both pain and warmth. He did know me well. "So what happened? Did you threaten to expose them to the community? Call Adult Protective Services? Or did you finally deploy whatever financial ace Harold left you? He hinted once that he had set up some special trust for you that nobody knew about." I smiled enigmatically. "Let's just say I reminded Curtis and Olivia that appearances can be deceiving. Sometimes the supposedly senile old woman is actually paying very close attention." Florence's eyes lit with appreciation. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. Will you be staying in the house now?" "Yes," I confirmed. "In fact, I'll be the only one staying here after a short transition period." "Even better," she clapped her hands together. "We must celebrate. Tea tomorrow? I want to hear every detail that you're willing to share." I agreed, feeling another small piece of my former life click back into place. My friendships, my social connections, my community standing. All the elements Curtis and Olivia had systematically restricted were now mine to reclaim. As Florence returned to her own house, I turned to go inside, ready to begin the process of truly coming home. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, marking not just the hour, but what felt like a new beginning. The house that Harold and I had built together would remain mine, as he had intended. The financial security he had carefully arranged would continue to protect me. And perhaps most importantly, I had proven, to my daughter, to my son-in-law, and to myself, that I was neither helpless nor confused, but rather a woman still very capable of managing my own affairs. Thank you very much. They had said I was too senile to manage my money. I had responded by buying their mortgage and reclaiming my life. Whatever came next, the rebuilding of my relationship with Olivia, the inevitable community gossip as Curtis and Olivia moved out, the practical details of living alone again, I would face it on my own terms, in my own home, with my dignity intact. As I ascended the stairs toward the master bedroom I hadn't slept in for months, I felt Harold's presence strongly, almost as if he were walking beside me. "Well done, Maggie," I could almost hear him say. "Well done indeed." The first week of reclaiming my home passed in a blur of practical tasks and emotional adjustments. Each morning, I woke in the master bedroom, momentarily disoriented to find myself back in the space Harold and I had shared for decades. The mattress was new. Curtis and Olivia had replaced our old one with a modern memory foam model that I found uncomfortably enveloping. But the room's dimensions and the way morning light filtered through the windows remained blessedly familiar. Curtis maintained a ghost-like presence in the house, leaving for his office before I woke and returning after I had retired for the evening. The few times we encountered each other in the kitchen or hallway, he offered nothing beyond terse nods of acknowledgement. His resentment hung in the air like a persistent fog, but I found it far preferable to the condescending concern he had previously affected. Olivia, by contrast, made daily appearances. She would stop by after her hospital shift, ostensibly to collect additional items for her stay at Emma's, but these visits inevitably extended into conversations over tea or dinner. These interactions carried a tentative quality, both of us navigating unfamiliar emotional terrain, trying to rebuild a relationship on more honest foundations. "How's the Westfield acquisition going?" I asked one evening as we shared a simple meal of soup and sandwiches at the kitchen table. The hospital where Olivia worked had been pursuing a merger with Westfield Medical Center for months, a project that had consumed much of her professional energy. She looked surprised by the question. "You remember about that?" "Of course I do. Why wouldn't I?" Olivia's cheeks flushed. I guess I got used to thinking you weren't following details like that anymore. Because Curtis convinced you I was losing my mental faculties, I said, keeping my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. She nodded, embarrassment evident. "We were so wrong, Mom. Looking back, I can't believe how easily I accepted his interpretation of normal aging as something more sinister." "The mind believes what it wants to believe," I replied, "especially when presented with a narrative that seems to explain observable facts. You saw me grieving for your father, living alone for the first time in over 40 years, occasionally forgetful as any person my age might be. Curtis provided a framework that made those normal behaviors seem pathological." "But I'm a healthcare administrator," Olivia protested. "I should have insisted on a proper evaluation, consulted with geriatric specialists, looked for objective evidence instead of just—" She trailed off. "Instead of just accepting what was convenient to believe," I finished for her. "The narrative that positioned you as the devoted daughter protecting her declining mother certainly felt better than acknowledging you were participating in taking control of my assets." The bluntness of my assessment made her wince, but she didn't disagree. "Curtis kept saying we needed to act quickly, before your condition worsened. He had all these stories about his grandmother, how his parents had waited too long to intervene." "And was that true? About his grandmother?" Olivia hesitated. "I've never met his grandmother. She died before we met. But Curtis talked about her dementia so vividly, so specifically. I never questioned it." The revelation hung between us. Another possible manipulation in what was proving to be an extensive pattern of deception. I chose not to press further on that point, turning the conversation back to her work instead. Yet the information settled into a growing mental file of concerns about the man my daughter had married. Walter visited regularly, helping me reinstate my control over various accounts and investments. We spent one full afternoon at First Lakeside Bank, where the manager, Victoria Santiago, greeted me with barely concealed surprise. "Mrs. Parker, how wonderful to see you. It's been quite some time." The carefully neutral phrasing couldn't disguise her shock at my apparent recovery from whatever condition Curtis had implied when managing my financial affairs. "Yes, Victoria. Nearly 4 months, I believe," I replied pleasantly. "Quite a lot has happened in that time." Walter, ever the professional, smoothly guided the conversation toward the business at hand. "Mrs. Parker wishes to review all her accounts and ensure proper access is restored exclusively to her. We'll need a complete audit trail of all transactions since January." Victoria's expression shifted subtly, confusion, then comprehension, then the particular blank mask that banking professionals adopt when they sense potential irregularities. "Of course. If you'll follow me to my office, we can address this immediately." The review revealed what I had suspected. Beyond redirecting my Social Security deposits, Curtis had attempted to access several of my investment accounts using the power of attorney document I had signed during those confused early days after being convinced of my cognitive decline. Fortunately, the bank's protocols had flagged some of these attempts for additional verification, which Curtis had been unable to provide. "He seemed quite frustrated when our systems required in-person verification from you," Victoria explained, scrolling through the transaction notes. "He insisted that your health prevented you from coming to the bank, but our policies for accounts of your size are quite strict about authentication." "Thank goodness for bureaucracy in this instance," Walter commented dryly. By the end of our banking expedition, I had new accounts established, enhanced security protocols implemented, and the distinct satisfaction of knowing that Curtis's financial maneuvering had been less successful than he had hoped. The most difficult task was sorting through Harold's belongings that had been boxed or discarded during Curtis and Olivia's modernization campaign. Many items were simply gone, sold, or donated without record. Others had been haphazardly packed in the basement, with little regard for their sentimental or actual value. I spent one tearful afternoon piecing together Harold's collection of vintage nautical maps, painstakingly recovering them from various boxes and assessing the damage from improper storage. Several had developed water stains from being placed near the basement's often damp wall. Others had been creased by careless folding. Florence Wilson found me in this melancholy task when she stopped by for our planned tea. Rather than redirecting to more cheerful activities, she simply rolled up her sleeves and joined me, her arthritic hands gently smoothing creased paper, her practical voice offering solutions for restoration. "My late husband Maurice collected stamps," she explained as we worked. "After he passed, my well-meaning niece thought the albums were just taking up space. Nearly threw out a first edition inverted Jenny worth thousands. I caught her just in time." She shook her head at the memory. "The young often mistake what they don't value as having no value at all." "That's precisely it," I agreed, carefully placing a restored map of the New England coastline, Harold's favorite, on the dining table to fully dry. Curtis saw these maps as outdated decorations taking up valuable wall space. He couldn't see the memories attached to each one, the trips Harold and I took, the stories behind how he acquired them, the hours he spent researching their historical significance. "Men like Curtis measure worth in dollars and immediate utility," Florence observed shrewdly. "They can't comprehend the value of history, of continuity, of objects that connect us to those we've lost." We had just finished sorting the salvageable maps from those too damaged to restore when the front door opened, announcing Curtis's unexpectedly early return from his office. He stopped short upon seeing Florence, his expression tightening. "Mrs. Wilson," he greeted her stiffly. "I didn't realize Margaret was entertaining." "Not entertaining, Curtis," I corrected. "Simply having a friend help me recover what remains of Harold's collection after your renovations." His eyes flickered to the maps spread across the dining table, a muscle working in his jaw. "I need to pack some additional items from the bedroom." "Excuse me." As his footsteps sounded on the stairs, Florence raised an eyebrow expressively. "Such charm," she murmured. "Hard to believe you haven't enjoyed his daily company these past months." Despite the seriousness of the situation, I found myself laughing, a genuine, unburdened sound that I hadn't experienced in far too long. "Florence, you are a treasure." "I'm an old battle-axe who calls things as I see them," she corrected with a wink. "Now, shall we have that tea while these maps dry? I brought lemon squares." The days settled into a new rhythm. I reconnected with friends Curtis had subtly discouraged from visiting, reassumed volunteer positions at the community center that had been abandoned during my decline, and began the process of reversing the more egregious decorating changes to my home. Diane Connors, my closest friend after Florence and a retired interior designer, arrived one morning with fabric swatches and paint samples, determined to help restore the house to its former warmth. "Gray is fine for prisons and corporate offices," she declared, eyeing the monochromatic walls Curtis had insisted upon. "But not for a home with a history like yours. We need to bring back some color, some life." Curtis's response to these gradual changes was to spend even less time at the house. According to Olivia, he had taken a small office at a local business center, working increasingly long hours trying to salvage client relationships and business opportunities damaged by the Lakeside Estates collapse. "His investors are threatening legal action," she confided during one of our dinners. "They're claiming he misrepresented the project's viability and the security of their investment." I felt a momentary pang of sympathy, quickly tempered by remembrance, of how easily Curtis had misrepresented my mental state when it served his purposes. "That sounds serious. How are you handling it?" Olivia sighed deeply. "One day at a time. Emma's been wonderful about extending my stay, but I know I need to make some decisions soon about everything, really." The unspoken question hung. Between us, was her marriage salvageable, and if not, what came next? "You always have a place here," I assured her. "Not as a caretaker or guardian, but as my daughter." Her eyes filled with tears. "After what we did to you? You'd still welcome me back?" "Family is complicated, Olivia. What happened was wrong. Deeply wrong. But I haven't stopped loving you. I've stopped trusting blindly, yes. I've established boundaries that won't be crossed again. But there's room for rebuilding if that's what you want." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Perhaps not yet," I acknowledged gently. "But I'm offering you the opportunity to earn it." At the 3-week mark of our new arrangement, Walter invited me to lunch at the country club, a venue I hadn't visited since Harold's death. I dressed carefully in a blue dress Harold had always admired, applied makeup for the first time in months, and even visited the salon for a proper styling of my silver hair, which had grown out attractively since Curtis and Olivia had insisted on the severe, age-appropriate cut they'd deemed more manageable for someone with my supposed limitations. Walter was waiting in the club's elegant lobby, distinguished in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt. At 78, he still carried himself with the confident posture of the college rowing champion he had once been, and more than one club member cast appreciative glances his way as he rose to greet me. "Margaret, you look wonderful," he said, taking my hands in his. "Absolutely radiant." I felt a flush of pleasure at the genuine admiration in his gaze. "Thank you, Walter. It feels good to look like myself again." He led me to a table overlooking the golf course, where spring had painted the manicured landscape in vibrant greens. As we settled in with menus, I noticed several familiar faces at nearby tables, including Robert Chen, Curtis's primary investor in the Lakeside Estates project. His expression upon seeing me was comically stunned, his whispered comment to his dining companion causing them both to stare in my direction. Walter followed my gaze and chuckled. "Ah, I see Curtis's narrative about your condition is being dramatically disproven simply by your presence. And my apparent ability to use silverware without assistance," I added dryly, unfolding my napkin with deliberate precision. Our waiter arrived to take our orders, and Walter selected a bottle of white wine to accompany our meal. As we waited for our first course, he updated me on the financial aspects of my reclaimed independence. The mortgage situation is proceeding, exactly as planned, he assured me. Curtis and Olivia have made no attempt to challenge the agreement. The house is officially back in your name, all accounts have been secured, and Lakeside Holdings remains the holder of their mortgage until they relocate permanently. And the development project. Olivia mentioned potential legal action from investors. Walter nodded, his expression turning serious. That's becoming quite the situation. Robert Chen. Yes, the gentleman who's been staring at you since we arrived has engaged counsel regarding Curtis's representations about the project's viability. There are questions about whether Curtis disclosed the full extent of the financial leveraging involved. Would that constitute fraud? I asked, concerned despite my complicated feelings about my son-in-law. Potentially, depending on what exactly was communicated to investors. Walter hesitated before continuing. Margaret, there's something else you should know. I've been doing some additional research into Curtis's business practices, and there are irregularities beyond Lakeside Estates. My appetite diminished as Walter outlined what his discreet inquiries had uncovered, a pattern of Curtis using personal relationships to secure investments, properties acquired and resold with questionable appraisals, and tax filings that reflected an unusual approach to business expenses. Nothing definitively illegal, Walter emphasized, but certainly aggressive and ethically questionable. The concerning aspect is how these patterns accelerated after his marriage to Olivia. It appears he saw access to your family's reputation in the community as an asset to be leveraged. The revelation settled heavily in my chest. Curtis hadn't just seen me as an obstacle to overcome. He had viewed my entire family, our history in Lakeside, Harold's respected position at the bank, even Olivia's professional standing, as tools to advance his increasingly precarious business ventures. Does Olivia know any of this? I asked. Quietly. I doubt it, Walter replied. Curtis has been careful to keep the business details separate from their personal finances. The mortgage on your house, their primary residence, is the only place where the lines clearly crossed. Our first course arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As we began to eat, I processed this new information, fitting it into the emerging picture of the man who had so nearly succeeded in taking everything from me. Should we tell Olivia? I finally asked. Walter considered the question carefully. That's a deeply personal decision, Margaret. On one hand, she deserves to know the full situation before making decisions about her future. On the other, introducing this information might seem like you're trying to drive a wedge between them, which could backfire if she's not ready to hear it. She's already staying with Emma, already questioning aspects of their relationship, I noted. But you're right. Timing and approach would be crucial. We shifted to lighter topics as we finished our meal, but the information about Curtis's business practices remained at the forefront of my thoughts. By the time Walter drove me home, I had reached a decision. I would wait for Olivia to come to me with questions rather than volunteering the information. If she was truly reassessing her marriage, she would begin asking the right questions on her own. The opportunity arose sooner than I expected. The following evening, Olivia arrived at the house in a state of visible distress, her professional composure cracked by what appeared to be a significant emotional blow. "Mom?" she called out as she entered, her voice strained. "Are you home?" I emerged from the kitchen where I'd been preparing dinner. "I'm here. What's wrong?" She paced the entryway, agitation evident in every movement. "I need to look at some financial records. Anything you might have regarding Curtis's business. Loan applications, partnership agreements, anything." "Why? What's happened?" Olivia stopped pacing, turning to face me with an expression of dawning horror. "Emma's brother works at Meridian Bank. He mentioned casually over dinner that Curtis had been denied a business loan there last year, apparently rather emphatically. But Curtis told me Meridian had approved initial financing for Lakeside Estates. He showed me paperwork. A cold sensation settled in my stomach. Falsified loan. Approval documents? I don't know for certain, she admitted. But when I called Curtis about it, he got so angry, Mom. Said I was spying on him, betraying his trust by discussing his business with outsiders. Then he hung up on me. I guided her to the living room, settling her on the sofa before retrieving the file Walter had compiled on Curtis's business activities. I had requested a copy after our lunch, intuition suggesting I might need the information sooner rather than later. Walter has been investigating Curtis's business practices, I explained, handing her the folder. Not out of vindictiveness, but as due diligence after what happened with our house. I think you should review this information, then decide what questions you need to ask Curtis directly. For nearly an hour, Olivia read in silence, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. Her professional training as a hospital administrator served her well in analyzing the financial patterns Walter had identified. This isn't just aggressive business strategy, she concluded finally, closing the folder. This is systematic misrepresentation, using projected revenues as if they were actual earnings, double-pledging collateral, claiming partnerships with firms that provided only preliminary interest letters. I remained silent, allowing her to process the implications without my influence. If the Lakeside Estates investors pursue legal action and these patterns are exposed, she trailed off, the potential consequences too overwhelming to articulate fully. Olivia, I said gently, what do you need right now? She looked up, her expression that of someone seeing a familiar landscape transformed by unexpected disaster. Clarity. I need to understand exactly what Curtis has done, what legal exposure exists, and what it means for our future. And I need to decide if... She swallowed hard. If there is a future for us at all. Then that's what we'll focus on, I assured her. Walter can recommend an independent financial investigator who can review Curtis's business activities more thoroughly. You should also consult with your own attorney, separate from Curtis's legal representation. She nodded slowly. Mom, I'm so sorry. If I had any idea what Curtis was really doing, with his business, with you, with our house, I never would have gone along with any of it. I believe you, I said, and in that moment, I truly did. Olivia had been manipulated as surely as I had been, albeit in different ways and to different degrees. Curtis had played on her concerns about my welfare after Harold's death, using legitimate worries as entry points for far less legitimate actions. That evening marked a turning point in our rebuilding process. Olivia stayed for dinner, then into the night as we talked more openly than we had in years. She shared her growing concerns about Curtis's behavior even before the current crisis. His controlling tendencies, his dismissiveness toward her opinions, his increasingly lavish spending despite cash flow issues he attributed to temporary business fluctuations. I kept making excuses for him, she admitted, curled in Harold's old armchair as I sat on the sofa across from her. When friends questioned why we needed such an expensive car or country club membership on our income, I'd repeat Curtis's explanations about investing in the right image for his business. When he insisted we needed to renovate this house, your house, immediately after taking possession, I told myself it was to make the space more functional, not because he was erasing Dad's presence. We often don't see what we're not ready to acknowledge, I said, thinking of how I had similarly ignored early warning signs about Curtis's character when Olivia first introduced him. Harold had expressed reservations that I had dismissed, as overprotective fatherly concern. As midnight approached, Olivia made a decision that surprised me. I'd like to move back home, not with Curtis in the guest room, but here with you if that's okay. Emma has been wonderful, but I need to be somewhere that feels like solid ground while I figure out what comes next. Of course, I agreed without hesitation. The blue bedroom is already made up with fresh linens, she smiled tiredly. My childhood room. Seems appropriate for a fresh start. The following morning, Curtis arrived unexpectedly as I was preparing breakfast. His appearance was disheveled, eyes bloodshot, suggesting a sleepless night. "Where's Olivia?" he demanded without preamble. "She's not answering her phone, and Emma says she's not there." "Good morning to you too, Curtis," I replied calmly, continuing to whisk eggs for an omelet. "Olivia is upstairs sleeping. She's decided to stay here for the remainder of the transition period." He stared at me, processing this information. "She told you about the Meridian Bank situation." "She did, along with reviewing other concerning aspects of your business practices that Walter has uncovered." "Walter," he spat the name, "that interfering old man has been poisoning both of you against me from the beginning. None of you understand how business works today, the risks required, the image maintenance, the strategic leveraging of assets." "Is falsifying loan approval documents part of strategic leveraging?" I asked, setting down the bowl to face him directly. He flinched almost imperceptibly. "I never falsified documents. I showed Olivia a preliminary approval that was later rescinded on a technicality." "A preliminary approval that Meridian Bank has no record of issuing," I noted. "Curtis, this has gone beyond family disagreements about living arrangements. There are potential legal consequences to what you've done." His face flushed with anger. "Are you threatening me? Again? Wasn't buying our mortgage and forcing us out of our home enough revenge for you?" "This isn't about revenge," I said quietly. "It's about truth. Olivia deserves to know exactly what she's facing as your wife and potential co-signer on various obligations. Just as I deserve to know the truth about my cognitive state before signing over my home." Curtis moved to the bottom of the stairs, calling up loudly, "Olivia, we need to talk, now. Don't let your mother turn you against me with these ridiculous accusations." I stepped between him and the staircase. "Lower your voice. This is my home, and you are a guest here only by the terms of our agreement. If you can't conduct yourself civilly, you'll need to leave." "Your home?" he laughed bitterly. "You never would have gotten it back if I hadn't needed it as collateral for Lakeside Estates. That's the only reason we moved in here in the first place, to establish residency before using it to secure additional financing." The casual cruelty of the admission stunned me momentarily. So the concern about my cognitive decline, the worry about my safety living alone, that was all fabricated to get control of the house? "Not entirely," he qualified, perhaps realizing he had revealed too much. Olivia was genuinely concerned. After that stove incident, I simply recognized an opportunity to solve multiple problems at once. Her worry about you, our need for additional collateral, the inefficiency of maintaining two households. "How pragmatic," I remarked coldly. "And relegating me to an unheated sunroom? Was that also solving multiple problems?" Before he could respond, Olivia appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a robe, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and resolution. "I heard everything, Curtis. I think you should leave." "Olivia, don't do this," he pleaded, instantly shifting his demeanor from confrontational to conciliatory. "Your mother and Walter have twisted everything. Let me explain properly without their influence." "I heard your explanation just now," she replied, descending the stairs slowly. "You just admitted that moving Mom in with us, moving into her house, was primarily about gaining control of a financial asset, not concern for her welfare." "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," she interrupted, reaching the bottom of the stairs and standing beside me, a unified front that clearly unsettled him. "I've spent the night reviewing documentation of your business practices, Curtis. The pattern is undeniable. You manipulate people and information to serve your financial goals, regardless of the ethical or emotional cost." He stared at her, apparently realizing that his usual tactics of deflection and reframing weren't working. "So that's it? You're choosing your mother over your husband?" Throwing away our marriage based on financial technicalities? I'm choosing honesty, Olivia clarified. I'm choosing to face reality rather than continue living in the carefully constructed narrative you created. And I'm asking you, respectfully, to leave now. We can discuss next steps through appropriate channels. Curtis looked between us, calculation visible in his expression. For a moment, I worried he might escalate the confrontation, but self-preservation apparently won out. Fine, he said finally. But don't think this is over. The agreement specified 60 days for relocation. I have the legal right to remain in this house for another 5 weeks. Actually, I interjected, the agreement specified that one of you would relocate immediately, while the other could remain in the guest room. Since Olivia initially fulfilled that condition by staying with Emma, your continued presence was permitted. Now that she has returned home, the appropriate interpretation is that you should be the one to find alternative accommodations. His jaw tightened. I'll have my attorney review that interpretation. Please do, I replied pleasantly. I'm sure he'll enjoy explaining how fighting to stay in the home of the woman you tried to declare mentally incompetent will play if this reaches a courtroom, particularly with your current legal vulnerabilities regarding lakeside estates. It was a calculated risk, leveraging his business concerns against his desire to challenge me on the housing issue. After a moment of visible internal struggle, Curtis conceded. I'll pack my essentials today, he said stiffly, and return for the rest of my belongings later this week. After he stalked upstairs to gather his things, Olivia released a shaky breath. That was necessary, I finished for her. Long overdue, perhaps, but necessary. She nodded slowly. I know, I really thought I knew him, Mom. How could I have been so wrong? I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling the slight trembling beneath her composed exterior. Curtis is exceptionally skilled at presenting what others want to see. He showed you devotion and ambition when you were dating, financial stability, when you married, and concerned son-in-law when Harold died. We believed what we wanted to believe about him. Just like we believed what he wanted us to believe about you, she acknowledged quietly. We stood together at the foot of the stairs, mother and daughter reunited in painful truth as Curtis's angry movements sounded from above. The breakfast I had been preparing was forgotten, but something far more important was being restored, a foundation of honesty upon which we could begin rebuilding our relationship. Later that morning, after Curtis had departed with 2 hastily packed suitcases and a promise to coordinate retrieving the rest of his belongings, Olivia and I sat in the garden with cups of tea, discussing practical next steps. I should speak with an attorney about separation, she said, her voice steadier now that the immediate confrontation had passed. And I need to understand exactly what financial entanglements exist between us before deciding whether divorce is the right path. I nodded, admiring her practical approach despite the emotional turmoil she must be feeling. Walter can recommend someone trustworthy for both legal and financial guidance. She gazed at the flowering crabapple tree Harold had planted the year of her birth, now in full spring bloom. Do you think we can recover from this, Mom? Not just you and me, but our family? Family isn't static, Olivia, I replied, thinking of all the transitions our small unit had weathered over decades. It evolves, changes shape, sometimes breaks apart before coming back together in new configurations. What matters is the foundation of truth and respect we build upon. She smiled faintly. You sound like Dad. He always had that same calm perspective on difficult situations. Harold would be proud of you today, I told her. Standing up for what's right isn't easy, especially when it means acknowledging painful truths about someone you love. As we sat in the garden Harold had designed and tended for so many years, I felt his presence more strongly than I had since his death. Not in grief this time, but in continuity. The manipulations of my son-in-law had nearly erased Harold's Legacy, but they had ultimately failed. Our home remained. Our daughter was finding her way back to the values we had instilled. And I had reclaimed not just my property and independence, but something even more precious: my sense of self. They had said I was too senile to manage my money. In proving them wrong, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, and courage I had forgotten I had. 6 months can change everything. The maple tree outside my bedroom window blazed with autumn colors as I sipped my morning coffee, watching the golden light transform ordinary leaves into stained glass masterpieces. The peaceful ritual had become precious to me. These quiet moments of reflection before the day began in earnest. So much had changed since that frigid day in the sunroom when I'd made the call to Walter that set everything in motion. The house had been fully restored to my name. The modernist gray walls had been repainted in warm colors that honored the home's character and history. Harold's nautical maps once again adorned the study walls, professionally restored and reframed. Most importantly, the temperature in every room was perfectly comfortable. No more shivering under multiple blankets just to sleep through the night. The legal aftermath of Curtis's business dealings had been messier than anyone anticipated. 3 weeks after moving out of our house, he was served with formal notification of investor lawsuits regarding Lakeside Estates. The falsified loan approval documents from Meridian Bank became the least of his concerns when forensic accountants uncovered systematic misrepresentations across multiple development projects. What Curtis had characterized as aggressive business strategy was revealed as outright fraud. Olivia had been devastated, but not surprised by these revelations. She had filed for legal separation immediately after Curtis's departure from our home, a process that evolved into divorce proceedings, as the extent of his deceptions became clear. The financial entanglements proved complex, but not insurmountable, thanks to Walter's careful guidance and the expertise of Nathan Chen, who represented Olivia throughout the proceedings. "You're lucky you had no joint property beyond the house. That was returned to your mother," Nathan had explained during one consultation I attended at Olivia's request. "And fortunate that Curtis kept his business dealings separate from your personal finances. Many spouses in your situation find themselves liable for their partner's financial misdeeds." Curtis had not gone quietly into professional disgrace. He made several attempts to position himself as the victim of market conditions, of overzealous investors, of his interfering mother-in-law. When those narratives failed to gain traction, he left Lakeside abruptly, reportedly relocating to Florida, where his parents had retired years earlier. The empty bedroom down the hall reminded me that changes continued. Olivia had lived with me for 4 months while finalizing her divorce and rebuilding her life. Those months had been healing for both of us, cooking together in the kitchen, tending the garden on weekends, gradually finding our way back to the easy companionship we had shared before Curtis entered our lives. 2 weeks ago, she had moved into a small but charming apartment near the hospital, a tangible statement of her renewed independence. "I need to stand on my own again," she had explained as we packed her belongings. "Not because I don't love being here with you, but because I need to prove to myself that I can." I understood completely. After my own experience of having independence stripped away, I recognized her need to reclaim her autonomy, to make decisions based solely on her own judgment. She visited several times a week for dinner, called daily, and had already secured my promise to help decorate her new place for the upcoming holidays. My phone chimed with a text message. "Walter, confirming our plans for lunch at the Lakeside Brew." Our friendship had deepened considerably through the events of the past months. What began as financial alliance had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated: a genuine connection, a comfortable companionship that brightened both our lives. "Looking forward to seeing you at 12:30, I typed in response, smiling at the small flutter of anticipation I felt. At 72, I had never expected to feel those particular butterflies again. Yet here they were, a reminder that life continues to surprise at any age. The lakeside community had largely rallied around Olivia and me once the truth about Curtis's business practices emerged. Those who had initially believed his narrative about my cognitive decline now offered awkward but seemingly sincere apologies. Victoria Santiago at the bank had been particularly mortified when she realized how Curtis had manipulated perceptions of my mental state. "I should have questioned why you suddenly stopped coming to the bank in person," she admitted during one of my regular visits to review my accounts. "We've known each other for 20 years. It wasn't like you to suddenly delegate all financial matters without a word." Curtis was very convincing, I replied, neither absolving her completely nor holding a grudge. He created a narrative that seemed plausible to people who didn't know better. Not everyone had been so easily deceived. Florence Wilson had seen, through Curtis from the beginning, her skepticism validated by subsequent events. She had become an even more frequent visitor, our afternoon teas extending into dinners and occasional weekend outings. At 82, she remained the most vibrant person in my social circle, her spirited observations about community happenings keeping me connected and entertained. As I dressed for my lunch with Walter, selecting a deep teal blouse that brought out the blue in my eyes, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from this difficult chapter. My relationship with Olivia, though tested severely, had ultimately strengthened through honest conversation and shared recovery. My friendship circle, which Curtis had systematically restricted, now flourished again. Most significantly, I had rediscovered my own resilience, the quiet strength that had always been there, waiting to be called upon when needed. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11, reminding me I had time to make one more important stop before meeting. Walter. I gathered my purse and a small gift bag, checked my appearance one final time in the mirror, and headed out to my car. A practical but stylish sedan I had purchased after reclaiming my finances, selected entirely according to my own preferences, without anyone declaring it too complicated for someone my age. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the Lakeside Community Center parking lot. Inside, the weekly senior computer skills class was just concluding. I waited patiently at the back of the room until the instructor, Kimberly Walsh, noticed my presence and wrapped up her presentation. "And remember, everyone, practice makes perfect. Keep working on those email attachments, and next week we'll tackle online shopping safely." She smiled warmly as the dozen or so seniors gathered their belongings. "Mrs. Parker, so good to see you. Are you joining us next week?" "Not as a student," I replied, approaching as the room cleared. "Actually, I wanted to discuss the teaching vacancy for the senior math and finance workshop. I understand the previous instructor has relocated?" Kimberly's expression brightened. "Yes, unfortunately. Are you interested in taking it on? That would be wonderful. Your background in mathematics education would be perfect." "I think I might be," I said, surprising myself with how right the decision felt. 30 years of teaching, high school mathematics, plus managing my own investments for decades. It seems a shame to let those skills go unused. "The seniors would benefit tremendously from your experience," Kimberly assured me, reaching for a folder on her desk. "Here's the curriculum outline, though you'd have considerable flexibility to adjust it based on participants' needs." As I reviewed the materials, a sense of purpose settled over me. A familiar feeling I had missed without fully recognizing its absence. Teaching had been more than a career. It had been a vocation, a way of connecting with others while sharing knowledge that empowered them. "I'll do it," I decided, handing back the folder. "When can I start?" "The next session begins the first week of November. Would that work for you?" "Perfect," I agreed, checking my watch. "I'm sorry to rush, but I have a lunch appointment. I'll stop by tomorrow to complete any paperwork." I left the community center feeling lighter than I had in months. Regaining my home and financial independence had been essential, but finding meaningful engagement, a way to contribute rather than merely exist, completed the restoration of my sense of self. Walter was waiting at our usual corner table when I arrived at the Lakeside Brew, his warm smile sending those unexpected butterflies fluttering again. At 78, he remained handsome in a distinguished way, his silver hair and immaculate attire drawing appreciative glances from several ladies in the cafe. "You're glowing," he observed as I sat across from him. "Something good has happened." "I've accepted a teaching position," I announced, unable to contain my excitement. "The senior math and finance workshop at the community center, one afternoon a week to start, possibly expanding if there's sufficient interest." Walter reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "That's wonderful news, Margaret. You'll be excellent. Those seniors won't know what hit them." "I've missed it," I admitted. "Not just teaching itself, but the purpose it provides. After everything that happened with Curtis and Olivia, reclaiming my independence was necessary but not sufficient. I needed to find meaning again." "I understand completely," Walter nodded. "After retirement, I floundered until I found volunteer work advising small business startups. Having knowledge to share and seeing it make a difference, there's nothing quite like it." Our conversation flowed easily through lunch, as it always did. We discussed Olivia's adjustment to her new apartment, Walter's plans to visit his daughter in Chicago for Thanksgiving, and the latest community gossip Florence had shared about the country club's financial troubles. Throughout the meal, I found myself studying Walter's face, appreciating the kindness in his eyes and the thoughtful way he truly listened, a quality increasingly rare in a world of divided attention. "I have something for you," I said as we finished dessert, reaching into my purse for the small gift bag I had brought. Walter accepted it with surprised pleasure. "What's the occasion?" 6 months since the day I called you from the sunroom. 6 months since you helped me reclaim my life." He unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a vintage compass in a polished wooden case. His eyes widened in recognition. "This was Harold's," he said softly, opening the compass to reveal the inscription inside. "To Harold, true north never fails. Love, Maggie." "He would want you to have it," I said, watching as emotion played across his features. "You've been my true north these past months, Walter. The steady guidance I needed to find my way back to myself." He closed the compass gently, cradling it in his palm. "I'm honored, Margaret. Truly." After a moment's pause, he met my eyes directly. "Would you consider having dinner with me this weekend? Not lunch, not coffee. Dinner. At Giovanni's, perhaps." The implication was clear. Giovanni's was Lakeside's most romantic restaurant, a place for celebration and special occasions. "Are you asking me on a date, Walter Freeman?" I asked, my tone gently teasing even as my heart beat a little faster. "I suppose I am," he admitted, with a charmingly boyish smile that belied his years. "Too forward of me?" "Not at all," I assured him. "In fact, I'd be delighted." As we left the cafe together, walking close but not quite holding hands, I marveled at life's unexpected turns. 6 months ago, I had been a woman declared too senile to manage her own money, relegated to a freezing sunroom while others controlled my fate. Today, I was a homeowner, a soon-to-be teacher, a supportive mother to a daughter finding her own strength, and, most surprisingly, a woman contemplating the possibility of new romance. Stepping into the autumn sunshine, I felt gratitude. For the hard-won wisdom of the past months, Curtis had unwittingly given me a profound gift: the opportunity to discover that I was stronger, more capable, and more resilient than anyone, including myself, had realized. They had said I was too senile to manage my money, so I bought their mortgage and evicted them. In doing so, I hadn't just reclaimed my property, I had reclaimed myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out!